Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for the view from the opposition. This week it comes from Sam Dymond, one of the hosts of Fulham Focus, a podcast covering Fulham, the visitors to St James's Park this Saturday. Sam, welcome to the podcast. How are you keeping? Are you well?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, just busy psyching myself up for another trip to St James's Park.
And all those stairs that you have to climb up to the heavens, I imagine.
Those stairs, yeah, 14 flights of stairs. I remember the first time I went, I'm pretty sure Fulham sent me a match ticket and then sent a separate note in another envelope that said, please be aware you will have to climb up 14 flights of stairs. And yeah, I've done it so many times, I'm still not used to it. And getting older doesn't help.
It's quite a unique experience. But we were talking about there off air just before we started recording. You were actually saying often the view from level 7, because you can see the cityscape, is often the best bit about your trip up to St James's Park, because Fulham have a terrible record on Tyneside.
It is really bad, really bad. And every now and again, we do sort of pull out a really sort of quite spectacular win. I can think of mid-2000s, there was a 4-1 win up there where Mark Crossley made about 30 saves, some of them with his face. And it was like the most smash and grab a 4-1 win could possibly be. There was the 3-1 in the Championship when Ryan Sessegnon scored a couple. But other than that, God, it's bad. And I think, it was 8 in a row we've lost, and I think 6 of those we haven't even scored. So, yeah, to say I'm going into it with some trepidation would be an understatement.
What do you think it is about visiting Newcastle and visiting St James's Park that has just got the better of Fulham all those times?
I think for so long, especially in the Premier League, we were poor travellers anyway. And that's, I guess, is one of the longest trips that we could possibly make up from London. I just think it's that setting. It's such an intimidating venue when you go there. And even if Newcastle are perhaps not at their best, if the fans aren't exactly happy with what's been going on, which has been the case quite a fair bit over the last decade, it still has a tendency, if there's a 15, 20 minutes a good spell from the home side, then those fans get behind them. And it's just a place where I just think we wilt, and we have done in the past. But I'd like to think this Fulham team have got a bit more steel about them. Whether that will bear us in good stead for the weekend, I don't know.
I was going to say, because I'm a big fan of Fulham. I like Marco Silva. I like the way you guys play. Got some really exciting players. It seems, looking from the outside in, that this has been quite a good season so far. The defeat to Manchester United, I think, was the first in 9 or 10, was it? So how is it going for Fulham? Are you kind of are you above where you thought you might be at this stage of the season?
It's an interesting question, really, because I think maybe if you'd asked me a couple of weeks ago, I would have said I was really, really happy with the way the season was going. But the more it kind of plays out, it feels like this is going to be a campaign where we look back and think what might have been, because we've had periods, as you say, we actually lost at West Ham just before the Man United game, so it's 2 defeats in 3, but we were on a long unbeaten run. But so many draws in that, and games that we should have won. And often we save our best performances for the supposedly the bigger teams, better teams in the division, and then we drop points at home to Southampton, at home to Ipswich, home to Bournemouth as well, although obviously Bournemouth are very, very good this season, as you guys will well know. But again, a last-minute goal has been quite a bit of that. And there have been periods this season where we think, well, we can actually have a real push at these European places and go for it. But the more it's panned out, it's kind of slipping away, and we see that we're not actually ready. There are too many areas that need strengthening in the squad. So, yeah, it's definitely a season of what might have been.
And when you look at how Bournemouth made light work of Newcastle the last time out at St James's Park, does that give you any encouragement that Fulham can go out and do the same?
Well, we were previewed it on the Fulham Focus pod earlier this week, and I kind of said does that Bournemouth result and performance give us hope? But I immediately countered it with, well, we're not Bournemouth, are we? We aren't Bournemouth, and that's become increasingly apparent. Funny, because we came up this time around with Bournemouth, and there's always been a lot of comparisons in terms of, I guess, smaller clubs in the division, although I would suggest that we are a bigger club than them, even though I hate that kind of argument. But yeah, I think what Bournemouth are doing, what Areola is doing there is very, very impressive. And we play in a different style. So I can't see the way that they troubled you being a way that we could get at you this weekend.
Can you just provide some insight into how Fulham do set up then, and what maybe their biggest threat is, and your biggest hope for them on Saturday is?
Well, yeah, so we really like to use the flanks, and particularly we like to use the left flank. Anthony Robinson has been by far and away our sort of standout performer this season, and everything seems to go through him. Obviously, he's a left back, but most of our attacking play does come through him on the left, on the overlap. And it really sort of depends on who he's playing with. He's had a lot of sort of promising performances with Alex Iwobi on that flank, but we've had to chop and change. And we've had another injury now to Harry Wilson, who's now out for 10 weeks. He limped off against Manchester United. So I don't really know who's going to be ahead of him. But I think you will see that most of our play will come through him. And I guess the hope is where we've struggled, and this was the case against Manchester United, we've struggled when coming up against teams that play five at the back. And with Newcastle, with Hall and Livramento undoubtedly pushing forward themselves, that may leave some gaps for us to exploit. And it may be a case that someone like Adama Traore, who has a lot of limitations, but he has the strengths to maybe again exploit space on the counter.
Well, I remember the game back at Craven Cottage in September. It was Traore and Iwobi who, for me, were the standout performers. I mean, they were great on the afternoon, but they were also helped by the fact Newcastle United just really played to their strengths, didn't track them, and just allowed them the freedom, and they made it pay. And I'm hoping Newcastle have learned from their mistakes this time around, because they are two danger men. In terms of Fulham on the afternoon, are they going to have try and have a lot of the ball? Are they going to sit back and try and absorb the pressure and hit Newcastle on the counter? What can we expect?
Again, that's an interesting question, because we have dominated a lot of games in terms of possession, but I often think we do look better when we concede it. So it's an interesting one, because Newcastle was so explosive themselves, with the likes of sort of Murphy and Gordon, and of course Isaac as well. It will be interesting to see who kind of takes control. And again, maybe that will come down to who we pick in the midfield, because Emil Smith-Rowe obviously came in with a lot of expectation on him, our club record signing, and it hasn't happened yet for him. Obviously scored against Newcastle. There were a couple of bright performances at the start of the season, but far too often he goes missing in games. And I think when a club like Fulham pay £35 million for a player, we are expecting someone to impact games week in, week out, and he just hasn't been doing that yet. So there's a possibility Tom Kenny might come into the team, in which case we perhaps will have a lot more of the ball. But the good thing about Marco Silva is he's very adept at changing up his side and the game plan. So I think it'll be one of those, it'll just sort of how it will pan out on the day. But I think we can be quite comfortable doing both.
I think the midfield will be absolutely key. For me, Newcastle United have shot up the league, Champions League contenders in terms of qualifying for next season. Of course, because Isaac is scoring goals for fun, but because that midfield three of Tonali, Bruno and Joelinton has clicked, and Tonali's been really the key factor, sitting as at number 6 and allowing Bruno to be more expressive, and Joelinton's just an absolute tank. So I think they are Newcastle's most important players in terms of controlling the game, and then once they do that, Isaac can do the rest. How comfortable are you that Fulham can stifle that midfield trio of Joelinton, Bruno and Tonali?
I'm not. So for the second season in a row, Marco Silva lost his most important player in the summer. So previously it was Alexander Mitrovic, and of course this year it was João Palhinha. And what we did was quite interesting in the fact that we couldn't find anyone who could replace what João Palhinha did. But we brought in Sander Berg, and alongside Sasa Lukic, who this time last year looked like he was out of the door. I remember we played Chelsea late January, and he came on for the last 15 minutes or so and put in an absolute stinker. And we all thought, well, he's off at the end of this window. There'd been a couple of links. He hasn't really got a future at the club. And since then, since Paulinho's left, he has really, really stepped up. And between Sasa Lukic and Sam Dymond in midfield, I feel like it is a match for anyone in the Premier League, bar Newcastle. Newcastle's midfield three really frightens me. It's an absolute powerhouse midfield three. And I was kind of I was checking sort of some of the local reports this week. And I was thinking, oh, please, let just one of them maybe be out. Like, I think Sean Longstaff's a good player, but like if he comes in, at least that maybe just gives us something to work with. I think those three are going to be very, very difficult to contend with. But as I say, Lukic and Berg have performed really, really well. They don't tend to put in bad performances. So I think it will be very competitive and it will be a very, very interesting matchup. But I expect, I mean, I'd be surprised if we came out on top in terms of that battle.
That will be the key battle. So that would be music to the ears of our listeners and viewers. In terms of the man up top, Raul Jimenez, he's got 8 goals this season, but he doesn't seem to maybe have that consistency that the top strikers have. Someone maybe like Alexander Isak. I mean, we saw down at Craven Cottage, he had a very good performance that afternoon. He was again given freedom by Newcastle's defence to score. I think it was the opening goal that day when he was allowed to turn and shoot. Fabian Schär just stood off him. I guess you'll be hoping for more of the same on Saturday.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, to be honest, I'll settle for him staying on the pitch this time because he didn't manage to do that the last time we went to St James's. That very, very peculiar challenge. Raul Jimenez is a funny one because at the start of the season, we didn't expect him to be our first choice striker. And again, sort of went back to Mitrovic leaving. Fulham, I think, Fulham fans have been waiting for the club to replace Alexander Mitrovic, and it hasn't happened. Like, Jimenez came in as a backup, and then suddenly Mitrovic left, and he was thrust into it. And obviously, what is he, 33 now? We knew he'd had this horrific injury during his time at Wolves, and he wasn't the same player as he was prior to that. But yet, the one thing Marco Silva does, and he's done it more than any Fulham manager I've ever known, is he improves players. He makes players much better. And for Raul Jimenez, who we pretty much thought his career was done, he's really brought him on. And yeah, as you say, he's a very much a first choice Premier League striker again. 8 goals it's not a bad return again for a club like us. And there's a lot of penalties in there, but as a Fulham fan, it's been so long since we had someone who could actually take and score penalties. But that's been a nice little bonus on top. But
I was going to say, so after that Ipswich game where he scored a double, I put him in my fantasy team, and then he hasn't scored in the last 3. Just my luck.
Yeah, and I wouldn't put much blame on him for that. And again, what became increasingly apparent against Manchester United was the first 20 minutes. I looked at that and go, well, we're much the better team here. We'll eventually break through. But it became more and more apparent we were just a little bit blunt, and we're not creating much. So he is really sort of feeding on scraps. And a couple of times he's come up trumps in terms of that. He's scored a brilliant goal against Arsenal to give us the lead. We managed to hold on for a draw. There's been some really, really good performances for him, but he is having to do a lot of it himself. So maybe 1 or 2 chances might come his way on Saturday. And I think if we are to get anything, he's going to have to take those.
I remember the first game of the season. I watched that, your first game of the season against Manchester United, and just thinking that it must have been so frustrating as a Fulham fan, because there was a few moments. My memory serves me correct. I think, was it Pereira was running through and he made the wrong pass, and it was a 3-on-1 you had, and there was a couple of other moments like that. And you think, if they'd just been switched on, and yes, the first game of the season, you could have won that game. Does that kind of sum up how this season's maybe been games of missed opportunity, perhaps?
Oh, certainly. I mean, so many missed opportunities. I think, is it now 19 points I think we've dropped from winning positions this season, which is something we just didn't do last season. If we got into the lead last season, and it didn't happen too often, but we were comfortable. We felt we could hold on. This season, it's been a very different case. And to be honest, the Newcastle home game is perhaps the one case in point where we actually did manage it, because you came out fighting, started second half, got a goal immediately back. And I think most other games this season, when something similar to that has happened, it's all kind of fallen apart. But I think there we were able to sort of compose ourselves, and eventually we get the third on the break late on. Too many missed opportunities. Again, missed penalty from Pereira in there. To be honest, that Pereira pass on the opening day, he hasn't really recovered from that in terms of his relationship with the Fulham fans. It's been a very difficult season for him. There's been a lot of reports about him leaving. Fulham have had to do quite a lot of emergency PR to try and get him back on side. But yeah, it's so many missed opportunities. And again, this goes back to what I was saying in terms of this is a season of what might have been. We feel like we should have been sort of knocking on the door for 7th spot, but it just hasn't happened.
I'm looking at the table here, and currently Fulham in 10th on 33 points. If they should beat Newcastle United, and I really hope they don't, but if they did, they'd be on 36, and obviously the results got to go their way, but you've got Aston Villa there on 37, sitting in 8th. So it's still quite congested, and you are looking at maybe 2-3 results, and suddenly you shoot up the table. I suppose the other side of that argument is if you don't start picking up wins, and you've had a lot of draws recently, then you do start sliding down the table, and that European spot gets further and further away.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I think the good thing is at least we are comfortable from relegation. I think we probably could end up not getting another point, and we might even be safe as the way things are going. But yeah, you do want to look upwards, don't you? And I mean, you know what it's like as a football fan. You win a couple of games, you win 2, draw 1, and suddenly you're thinking, oh, okay, well, let's look at the teams above us. But of course, one of those wins ends up becoming a defeat, like it did for us at West Ham, a game where we barely gave them a touch of the ball in the first half an hour and then conceded 2 sloppy errors very, very quickly. And it's like, just gets to the stage where it's like, oh, let's finish above Brentford, just something like that. So yeah, it's just the fickle nature of being a football supporter, isn't it? It's 1 week everything's rosy, and then the next week it's a complete crisis.
Yeah, we've had a few of those results this season, and you just think, had you beaten Brighton when you battered them and just didn't take your chances, had you not lost to West Ham like everybody else did under Lopetegui, then Newcastle United, would probably be second in the league. But as you say, it's just football, and one of those things, isn't it? In terms of the players that Newcastle United have got, is there anyone in particular that you're fearing in black and white?
I'll take your pick. It looks such a strong starting 11 at the moment. I've been really, really impressed with Newcastle over the last couple of months. But you can't really look beyond Alexander Isak in the form that he's in. It's absolutely astonishing. What is it? Is it 13 in 10? He's got. Yeah. It's just, and obviously I knew what a good player he was when he came over, but it felt like sort of that first. This is his second full season, isn't it? So it felt like previously there was kind of little purple patches, little flashes. Obviously, he was sharing the load with Callum Wilson a lot. But this season, he's just exploded, and he just looks a player who can score all kinds of goals as well. And I'm worried because if he kind of sort of drops in on the left and comes in, as he sort of has a tendency to do when I've seen him, that's an area I feel Newcastle could exploit, because Kenny Tete, who was, again, so key to our early season form, he's out long term. So Timothy Castagne's come in. And perhaps I mentioned Emil Smith-Rowe in terms of our big money signings and not really clicking. Joachim Andersen has been the surprise, paid big money for him to bring him back from Palace. And he kind of he's struggling a bit. He struggled last week against Manchester United in terms of his passes forward and trying to sort of start play from the back. But also he's had trouble with sort of balls in behind him and over the top. And I worry that gap between Castagna and Andersen could be a situation that Isak really, really takes advantage of.
I'm sure that maybe Bruno Guimaraes will be looking to exploit that with an assist or two. Can you just tell us then, first off, what is Fulham's biggest weakness, which you think anyhow will have pinpointed for Saturday?
Well, I think it could well be that situation, that kind of that gap between Castagna and Andersen. I think if you've got Isak coming in there, Gordon pushing forward, and as you say, like Bruno sort of playing balls in behind, and God, even Joe Linton bursting forward and God, Hall coming down as well, maybe on the overlap. It's that really does worry me. But again, then it's just perhaps our real weakness is our just inability to sort of make clear-cut chances at the moment. As daft as that sounds, I think our play can be really, really good up until that last sort of 20 yards, and then it's like, oh, it's another sort of good opportunity that we've let go to waste. And for all Anthony Robinson's strengths, sometimes it is his crossing that lets him down, and he gets in behind, and we finally got some players in the box, and the cross doesn't come in. It's like, well, we're not going to get many better opportunities than that. But yeah, you can see that I'm not completely confident about this one.
Yeah, but that'll just fill our listeners and viewers with absolute dread, because every time Newcastle United seem to be confident about a result, think back to that West Ham game, they end up messing it up. Thankfully, it didn't happen against Wolves, so everyone was expecting a win, but you just never know, do you, with football? What's the biggest strength that Newcastle need to look out for?
I'd say it's that left-hand side. I think Robinson, he's played every single minute in the Premier League this season. And he just doesn't stop running. It's incredible. You go into the 88th minute, you've been up against it, even if we've conceded a lot of the ball and we've had to do a lot of running, and yet there's a break and suddenly he's gone from one penalty area to the next, and it's just absolutely astonishing. He just never stops. Other than that, it's Alex Iwobi has, you mentioned how you were impressed with him in the reverse fixture. He's been really, really good this season. And again, that's one of the players that Marco Silva, I think, has brought the best out of. He's added goals to his game this season, which he's never really sort of had consistently in his career. But also, he gets the ball on the half turn and he looks to make things happen. I think only Mo Salah has perhaps played more progressive passes successfully this season. So a lot of it will go through Iwobi. And again, if Iwobi and Robinson are linking up together on the left, then that's our biggest hope. And, hopefully Tino has pushed on a fair bit and there's room to exploit.
I mean, I think Iwobi's scored the goals he's got this season is his biggest tally in the Premier League so far in his career, which shows you how well he's doing and maybe how high he didn't reach in his previous seasons with both Everton and Arsenal. And yeah, that stat you mentioned about Mo Salah, I picked that one up as well. So that shows you that he's probably the threat Newcastle United need to look out for. Just before we go on, ladies and gents, a reminder that this podcast is sponsored by NordVPN. You know what to do by now. Hit the link in the podcast description box. Sign up. Discounted offer for our listeners and viewers. Keep yourself protected. Help support the podcast. 1 subscription, 10 devices. So it's value for money and it keeps yourself safe, especially when you're out there using public Wi-Fi. Sam, Newcastle have got a massive game on Wednesday in the League Cup, second leg of the semi-final. 2-0 lead going into that game against Arsenal. Do you think, I suppose you'll be hoping that Newcastle are slightly distracted by that on Saturday?
That is something that we discussed again on our preview of the game. I think just a 2-0 lead going into a home game, not that you'll be taking it for granted, because obviously Arsenal were a very good team. But I think that's just too much of a hurdle for them to overcome. So the one thing that I can maybe hope is that both players, staff, fans are caught up in the excitement of another Wembley trip. I know, well, at least you've won trophies. We've not won one, but it's been a long time coming for you. Is it 1969? Is it the last time you won a trophy? Yeah. So, I mean, I know how much it means to the club. So I can only hope it does act as a minor distraction. But I had the good fortune to actually spend Christmas evening in Newcastle. I was working for Amazon Prime on the Newcastle Villa game on Boxing Day. So I had the good fortune to see Newcastle first up, and I was very, very impressed. And yeah, it's a terrifying prospect. So I'll take anything. If slightly distracted by a cup final on the horizon, I'll take it. Please let that happen.
Eddie Howe is very much a man who just likes to concentrate the game coming up. So I'm hoping he's drilled that into his players, that we focus on Fulham, nothing more. Because of course, look, if you win against Fulham, then you bounce into Wednesday on a high. If you lose to Fulham, then I think the nerves that will be there as the undercurrent as kickoff comes against Arsenal, they'll just rise straight to the surface. So it's really important that Newcastle focus on Fulham and get the job done. How is it going to go on Saturday then, Sam? What is your score prediction?
So the one thing we do have a tendency to do is we score in away games. It's that Manchester United game on the opening night. I think it's the only away game we haven't scored in this season. It's our best ever run in terms of scoring in away fixtures in our Premier League history. So I can see us getting a goal. But again, as I pointed out earlier, we have a habit of letting leads slip. And I think Newcastle have got quite a good record, haven't they, coming from behind? They won 4 games out of 12 where they conceded the first goal. So, I mean, I can see us getting the goal and then Newcastle just switching it on. So I can see maybe perhaps a 3-1 victory for Newcastle, unfortunately.
Well, I'll take that, and I'm sure all our viewers and listeners will. It doesn't really matter how it comes or what the score is, as long as Newcastle United pick up those 3 points in the race for Europe and set themselves up for that Wednesday game against Arsenal in the League Cup semi-final. Sam, thank you very much for popping onto the podcast and providing the insight into Fulham. To you guys watching and listening, please give a thumbs up on YouTube, hit subscribe as well, leave us a rating and review on the podcast channel, share it amongst your Newcastle United supporting friends and family. And for myself, I will be back on Monday for the Monday show with Aaron Stokes, hopefully celebrating 3 points for Newcastle United.